Hey, everybody. Chris and I have our first sponsor. We're so happy now. Our association with the Ruinous Media Network has yielded us a sponsor, and it is DistroKid. And they help people get music up onto streaming platforms easily and cheaply. I use it. I've uploaded a bunch of stuff that I recorded eons ago, and now all that stuff's on streaming media platforms. And I did it through DistroKid, and it was super simple. So if you're a listener of ours and you want to try DistroKid, I highly recommend it. The code for you is Talk Guitars. So it's distrokid.com/VIP/Talk Guitars. So try it out. I hope you dig it. That's our first sponsor, man.
No shirt, no shoes, oh shit, no service blues.
Today we are going to talk about audio myths. Chris sent me this awesome video with a panel of a few people, hearing experts, talking about audio myths and how we bring our biases and perceptions to audio. And they had some great examples, and they had just a great panel discussion about this. You know, this conversation's been going on for a long time. I mean, I remember seeing things like this and similar things, like, you know, people picking somebody out of a lineup, and, you know, those tests that they do, and people picking the wrong person every time because they brought their biases to bear on, you know, what they think they saw. But this is great because it really deals with audio. And Chris and I are always talking about this stuff in terms of, and we're all guilty of it. None of us is exempt from, you know, applying our biases or what we think we hear to audio. And so it's just, I think it'll be a great discussion, and it's always fun to just keep this in the back of your mind anytime you're listening to something or, you know, evaluating audio. You know, just try to remember that we bring our own biases to it. Chris, get us kicked off. How did you come across this video? Were you just surfing YouTube or something, or?
Yeah, I don't know how this fell into down my feed, but I'm kind of fascinated by these discussions that people have, you know, the guitarists have about tone and, you know, all this stuff. And I, you know, from the outside, I like to look at this, and I'm also a huge fan of like conspiracy theories and things like that, and how people come to believe certain things, and smart people can believe things like that are, you know, don't make any sense from a scientific standpoint. So I found some massive thread on a pedal forum. There was like 35 pages long of like some electrical engineers arguing with some of these like hobby pedal builders about, can you hear the difference between tone caps? Right. And their point is that, you know, we can measure these things now. It's not like we can't just like, it's not like up for debate on this. And as far as in a low voltage circuit, like a pedal, it's like you can actually use equipment and measure this stuff. And it's like there is no perceptible difference between the type of cap you use if you use the same value in the same circuit, blah, 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 whatever. And I just thought it was fascinating that it garnered that much attention and people were getting heated. That's where I found this video. And I watched the video, which of course we're going to post so if anyone listening to this can check it out. And I just thought it was fascinating because like you said, I've heard some of this stuff before, seeing people who studied this stuff presenting it, and it was just fascinating for me. I just thought it was totally fascinating. They even used the Stairway to Heaven backwards kind of like, which was really great because I'm familiar with the myth and I kind of knew some of it was purported. It said, and I heard some words when it was played back, but not really. But then when they put the words up and you follow along, it's like, that's exactly what he's saying. Of course. And that's what our brain does. Yeah. So it's just fascinating. And it can be a useful tool. You know, my fear has always been in the guitar community that we're, you know, moving towards becoming the audiophile community, which scares the shit out of me because that's like the wacko people. That's like the $1,000 speaker cables and things like that. Yeah. And, you know, we're we could be heading in that direction. At this point in my life, I don't care because I know what I'm gonna go for. And also with guitar stuff, for me, anyways, it's almost like there's an element of like religiousness to it for me. You know, it's kind of like faith. It's like I like the way some things look. They have vibes and things like that, and I don't care. You know, sometimes I don't care what the science says, but it's great to be aware of it. You know what I mean? And it could actually save you a bunch of money. But for me, it's just completely fascinating.
I think our society in general is heading to that direction, anti-science, anti-expert mentality, you know, in our society in general, I think. And you're right. I think especially when you're dealing with things like, you know, musicians and different cliques of people like audiophiles and everybody else, like you said, I mean, none of this has anything to do with intellect or education or experience. It's just how we are built as human beings and how we've evolved. We're kind of self-centered beings, and we tie our emotions to a lot of things, right? Like our expertise in being able to hear something or see something or do something. Yeah. So, and like you said, you and I are the same. We're the same as everybody else, and we bring our own biases to bear. But I think it does behoove us all to think about, like, look, all this stuff can be measured scientifically. There's test equipment. You can do blind tests, which are the best ways, to evaluate that stuff.
It's impossible to do an audio test without a blind test. It's just, and that's like the first, if you only listen to the first 10 minutes or so of the video, you learn a lot, and a lot makes sense. It's like, if you're listening for something, you're going to hear it. If you're listening for top end, you may not even hear the bottom end. If you're listening mid range, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's not, you're not wrong when you say these things. Like, I can hear a difference in this. It's not that you're wrong or anything, but it just might not be accurate. You know what I mean? Yeah. So if you really want to test something, you have to do a blind test, and it is a fact that you could get, like, let's say the tube screamer, go out and find 12 tube screamers. They're all going to sound slightly different. They're always the sum of their parts. There's a bunch of parts in there. Yeah. But the thing it is that this is the thing that drives me kind of nuts, but still, I'm still fascinated by it, is one part gets picked out in that is the vibe. Like the tube screamer, it's like a chip. It's like the chip, and it's ridiculous when you think, like, critically about this. You think, okay, this is the chip that gives the tube screamer its sound. So, and people will pay more for that. They'll pay for the chip, an expensive old chip. When you look at the circuit from an engineering standpoint, it doesn't make a difference or enough to even be able to tell. It's all the other parts, and that the sum of all the other parts that make the difference, but they are all going to sound different. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because anything where there's a guitar or amp, and it's always the sum of the parts. So yes, you definitely want to use your hearing, and you want to develop good ears and be able to tell what you like and what. Yeah. But another thing that I find that's fascinating but kind of annoying is, like, we just won't let it go as guitar players. There's millions of clickbait links. And what was it recently? It was like, Lear Fender said that tone wood doesn't matter. And then so the whole internet's going off, like, arguing back and forth. I'll answer that right now. Who fucking cares? You know what I mean? It does not matter. I like how a Les Paul sounds. I like how a Telecaster or Stratocaster sounds. Yeah. They're made out of wood. If I find one that's got a different type of wood, I like the way it sounds and it plays. It's like, we don't need to argue about this anymore. Yeah. I mean, if you do, you can do it scientifically, and you might not like what you find out. You know what I mean? So it's like, yes, no one's saying that we don't trust your ears or anything like that. Or, who cares? If you think I'm fucked, the science says I'm fucked. I don't care. I like the way this sounds. I think it sounds better than that. And that's totally fine. But for me, it's just fascinating to know this stuff. Yeah. And because I've changed over the years. And that's one thing that I really like about science too, is like, once it finds out that it's wrong, it doesn't like argue. Right. It like adjusts things to make it like, okay, here's what we know now. We now have something that is, knocked out what we believe to be true in the past. So let's go on forward with this. And I like to kind of operate that way too. And I've changed. I mean, I used to my black Les Paul guitar, I had like every capacitor in the world in that. And I never heard anything really. I had no capacitors in there, and I couldn't really perceive that much of a difference without actually being it. So, and then what you do is you try tests like that. And for me, it's like, I don't care. That's something I don't have to think about. Yeah. I don't give a shit. It doesn't matter to me. You know what I mean? So I don't think about that. My biases are kind of visual. You know what I mean? I love the way that old amplifiers look on the inside, old pedals, old parts. I like them. So my visual bias just, puts into my brain, this is naturally going to sound better because it's got all those old parts. And it might sound better, but if it sounds better, if an old pedal sounds better than a pedal that's newer, that's the same circuit, it's because of different, the variations, things that have gone out of, spec, have like kind of drifted in interesting ways. Yeah. And one thing that's really fascinating that I found that I've been thinking about lately is whenever there's something that comes up here's the same thing, but this is the one you want. This is why. Yeah. It's always the older one. It's never the new one that comes like, that one's the better one. And there was an interesting story with the guy who made the Rat pedal, right? He's from Kalamazoo. He developed the Rat pedal. And at some point early in the stage of the Rat circuit, he swapped out some capacitors. He was using like tantalum caps or something like that. Mm-hmm. And they either became unavailable or he found something with a better tolerance for the circuit or something like that. Anyways, he changed them in the pedal And he listened to me and said, there's no difference, there's no measurable difference enough for us to tell. So he went forward with it. And then he said that people started coming up to him and telling him that the old ones sounded better. And his thought was, well, maybe those capacitors have a tendency to drift in it, in an interesting way. My thought is like, the guitar players are hearing what they want to hear. There's there is no difference. That's likely what's going on, in my mind. But that's another thing that's super interesting about this stuff too. Like talk about like chips, like in the Tube Screamer or anything like that. Yeah. A lot of the pedal builders are they're very cool about like not really, they're like, I'm not going to tell anybody that they don't hear a difference in these things. Yeah. Which I think is really cool. I'm not either. I'm not going to tell a guitar player you don't hear that. But the other thing that's I find is kind of fascinating with a lot of like pedal experts, people who like have experience with lots of pedals and they write great articles and, books even, and they'll dedicate pages and things to like kind of perpetuating these myths. Like, let's talk about the different sounds of the different, Tube Screamer chips. This one has more mid-range and blah, blah, blah. They either know better and they're just doing, I'm not a cynic. I don't want to be the cynic that says they're just doing it to make money, because I don't believe that, because they're passionate. Yep. They're really into the stuff. They're really knowledgeable and stuff like that. But it's just an interesting thing because, again, maybe they're hearing things, maybe their brain is telling them that these differences are real or whatever. And, bottom line is, who cares really, other than it's a fascinating thing to think about, because I like that kind of shit.
We're human beings, and we're just, this cauldron of emotions and self-importance and feelings. And we bring that to bear on everything in our lives, and especially stuff like this, which is creative, and your identity is associated with, you as a musician, or you know what I mean? And right. So it is. So I think that is important to keep in mind too. It's like, there's science that will poo-poo, a lot of this shit, but the bottom line is, maybe we'll let you down easy, or, you know what I mean? Or who gives a fuck? Cool. Yeah. If you think you hear the difference, that's awesome. But I was struck too by, I think his name's James Johnson. He was a hearing expert on the panel. And he, right off the bat, he talked about a study he did. He had a switch on this box, and, the users couldn't see where the two choices went, right? But I think it was between a tube amp and a solid state amp or something like that.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And he had all these people, he'd flip the switch and they'd flip the switch, and then, they told him, which one they thought was better. And then the last guy flipped the switch. He went up there close, and then he looked at him and goes, "You smart ass." Because the switch didn't do anything. Right. It didn't change.
The tube amp wasn't even working.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I thought it was really funny. Again, like, blind tests are the only way to really tell if there's a difference, or to see if you, the person, can hear a difference in something. But again, too, like you're saying, who gives a fuck? But I think I'm always fascinated by this shit too, because I'm always fascinated just by human beings, like sociology and psychology. We're walking contradictions all the time, and it is so fascinating. I guess one thing might help, like maybe if you're in a studio situation or something like that, bring the science to bear to maybe quell arguments that might go on because somebody can hear a difference or something. And then I thought it was awesome when they also talked about the producer fader in the studio, which is not hooked up to anything. It's just right. They give the producer something to do so that he thinks or she thinks she's important. Yeah.
My thing is, I think I have a different view on that. I think we don't need to have this argument anymore. You know what I mean? I think it's pointless enough. Yeah. It's kind of like, you don't see like serious science out there arguing that Bigfoot doesn't exist or something like that. It's like, we don't, right. It's not something, we've moved on from that. You know what I mean? There's nothing out there to suggest that, we moved on, we got shit to do. I think that other than it being a fascinating thing and it's fun to do and fun to dick around with, those questions, we don't even need to ask them, because in the end, if you think that sounds better than it does, you should go with that. Yeah. And the other thing that we tend to forget, and this is something we say all the time, I say it all the time, tone doesn't have anything to do with stuff. Maybe a little bit superficially, but everything that has to do with tone, or people recognize you as having good tone, is like technique, and it's like vibrato, it's like dynamics, it's phrasing, it's all these things that you work on. Yeah. And you know what? There's millions of great sounding amps. If you just go out and get an amp, plug it in, you want a pedal, get a pedal, and work on those things, and you'll have great tone. That's where it all comes from. But we forget that. And plus, it's fun. It's fun to dick around with different shit. You know what I mean? It's fun to build. I know people will build pedals and they'll use old parts like carbon cop things, and it's really cool. And, those are aesthetically, it's really pleasing. But, we don't have to have the argument of like, is this sound better than that one because of these parts that, science says it can't really, You know,
Yeah.
it's like, it doesn't matter if it sounds good to you, it is good. But I say that we shouldn't have these arguments, but I'm like a rubbernecker every time I see
Well,
it.
because it's fun to talk
Argue
about.
it.
Yeah.
High voltage circuits, they can definitely have more of an influence. Take capacitors too, so it's different types. Like, ceramic capacitors may be exactly the same in a pedal, but you put
Yeah.
it in a high gain thing, it's going to be noisy and microphonic and all this other shit. So there is some thought that goes into, choosing different parts like capacitors.
Yeah.
And I think that's super important. And the other thing, what was I going to say? Something about that. For me, my arguments are always for parts. Choosing one part over the other is always about reliability.
Yeah. I was gonna
Things
say.
like that.
Cool.
That's always been a big thing. I never like when I argue about I like old pedals or I like old amps or something. It's never usually for the tone thing so much as the way that they just hold up better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's a really good myth bust video that Josh Scott from JHS Pedals does. And I agree with everything he says. It's great. But there's one point where if he's talking about tone, like it's basically this is not better than this. One is not better than the other. And one of the things is one of the last ones he says, it's like SMC, is that what you call them? Like the sub miniature parts, the modern like components that are like in the cell phone or whatever. They're in pedals now. It says that through hole components, which is the O style, are better than the sub miniature components. And I agree tonally, they're probably, the same, or maybe they're even have better specs and they're more tolerant, better tolerances and whatnot. But from a maintainability and serviceability, they're not even close. I mean, for someone like me who like buys a pedal and I want to like, as long as I have that pedal, I want to be able to take care of that.
Yeah.
And with the sub miniature stuff, you can actually repair it. You can mod it, but it's really hard. And someone my age with my shitty eyes, without like microscopes and shit, it's not going to be able to do it. And plus it's no fun to do that. You know what I mean? It's just really hard to work on. So it's, the old stuff is much better in that way. And we're moving towards that. And, they might be better. They might sound just as good and they might be even more reliable.
Yeah.
But, it's like, it's not a better than, it's like, this is better in this way. This is better in that way. I don't know. That was a tangent, but.
No, I think it's valid because that's what I was going to pop in and say. I think I remember you talking about the reason you hearken back to these older amps and pedals and stuff is for reliability, is the parts were better. I mean, made better and things were made. And there's truth to that. I mean, built-in obsolescence is a thing. And once that started to happen, all bets were off because people were trying to get the cheapest crap they could to build stuff and just to sell more stuff to somebody. So, but also I agree with what you're saying earlier. I do think most people who, subscribe to, selling high-end audiophile stuff or even stuff they believe is going to, that's not proven, but they think will improve audio or something. I think they're I wouldn't say well-intended, but I think they believe themselves. They believe what they're talking about. And they're selling it to other people. But it was funny that another example, they showed this picture of these crystals or stones that you can tape to your audio cables to make.
Oh yeah.
Which I
There's
thought
tons
was
of shit like
awesome.
that.
A jar,
There's things even more
Oh my
ridiculous
God.
in the audio, and I don't want to. I won't go to those forums and listen to those arguments. But I am fascinated by some of the wacko stuff. There was like a wooden knob or something that was like $3,000 or something, or maybe even more than that.
or an alligator clip that was just an alligator clip that some person claimed was better than other alligator clips that he was selling for a lot more money. But I guess that's the one thing that intrigues me about this, because it ties into so many other subjects like cults or anything else. Is like, it doesn't matter how smart you are, how educated you are, you're a human being and you've got this stuff built into you through evolution. We're evolved to see patterns. We're evolved to be self-centered for our survival, essentially, right? And so all of this stuff manifests in these interesting ways when we're put in situations where whether it's like evaluating audio or evaluating whether or not we should get into this white van or whatever. And so that just fascinates the hell out of me.
Another thing that's really, that I think is super human nature, but it's kind of problematic, is we're really prone to correlation equals causation. You know what I mean? It's like the things I've experienced, like I think this about this because that's been my experience. And so we'll just write everything off. That's what this is. And that's not necessarily true. And that's okay if you're just going to keep it to yourself. My problem is when things start to get like, and that's what, that's rampant on the internet, is like misinformation just goes from here. And I'm to the point now, I'm at the age, I don't care anymore, but it is kind of like interesting, and it's kind of dangerous for down the road. You want people to have a good chance at really finding the right tools to make their way through all this. And there is a ton of misinformation out there. So,
Yeah.
But the thing of it is, and this is what some people tend to forget, that you can find out. The information's super highway. You can find out anything you want. And that brings me to another thing. There's something in this, and I don't know, I don't really understand it, but there's this weird sort of flex for people that like the golden ear thing. It's like there's something about that's really a sense of pride for having like golden ears or being able to tell this stuff. And I don't really understand that much. Totally. It doesn't really make sense to me. It's kind of like the string thing. You know what I mean? It's like, and I think we're getting past that point, but it used to be, especially in the 90s, the later 90s, it's like you were looked down on for playing lighter strings. You know what I mean? So you got to play these strings. You know, I play 17 through 72. Totally. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm a real guitar player. And I think we're getting past that, but it's like, it's just kind of weird. It's like, yeah, well, that's great. Some people get really, really good sound on light strings and some people use heavier strings. That's all.
Well, no, because our identities are tied to this stuff. And so that's how you understand it. It's like, you know, if I'm known and I feel that my ears are great and I can hear all this stuff, it's, you know, that makes me feel good about myself, right? I'm this expert based on my hearing, or, you know, what I can hear, I play 17 gauge strings, man. I'm a
tone for days,
the ultimate tone. And because we tie our identities to that stuff. So I understand it totally. It's human. It's very human for us to want to feel good about ourselves in some way, right? I'm a good driver, or I can hear the difference between that 9-volt and this 9-volt battery. And we take pride in that shit, right? And so that's why it is like you're saying, it's interesting. It's like, just let them you can have that, except in the fact where somebody's actually literally trying to screw you and sell you something knowingly that's bullshit. Yeah. And I don't agree with that at all. And I'm sure that happens, but I think by and large, as we talked about, I think most people are just genuinely, hey man, I believe this stuff. I've heard it for myself. And that's why I endorse these platinum plated speaker cables that you can plug into your that sound.
No, it's kind of like with religion. It's totally fine. I think, you know, spirituality is important for every. It's a very personal thing. It's important for everybody. But let's not make policy out of it. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the same thing. Believe what you want.
Exactly.
And you were mentioning the battery thing, and it kind of cracked me up, because in the past, when I heard this scenario, we're talking about Eric Johnson can hear difference between different styles of batteries in his pedals.
Yeah.
In the past, I might have been, no, he can't. Yeah. Cuckoo, whatever. But then you see that video that we were just talking about. This whole episode is based on. And you're like, he actually does hear a difference. Right? Yeah. So he's not wrong. He's not wrong. Yeah, yes. So it just makes things make a lot more sense, and it kind of, you know, makes you relax a little bit. And it's like, maybe we can stop having like these, you know, I saw after that video, which I think was fairly recently, or maybe it's just recently getting to me, where the whole like tone wood on a guitar, does it matter or not? And then all these videos that came after. I even saw a video with Paul Reed Smith like arguing. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? You're like, don't waste your time arguing about this. This is like not a thing that you should even be taught. You should be working on guitars and doing all this other stuff. It's like, you know, what are you going to do? All right, we found out that tone wood doesn't matter. Okay, no more wooden guitars. Is that what's going to happen? It's like, no. It's like, you know, here's a stick with some string on it. It doesn't matter. The outcome doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It's like, and, you know, there's things that we just perceive to be true, and whether they're true or not, it doesn't matter. Do you perceive on a Stratocaster that a maple fretboard sounds different than a rosewood fretboard? To me, yes, it always has, and it always will. Yeah. And, you know, there might be science that says I'm wrong, and it doesn't matter. Yeah. It's just like something that is. And I don't know if I'm doing a double standard thing here, but I'm not. And I'm just saying that, you know, some stuff doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like that, because it's not going to, you're not going to change anything. I think it's like somebody looking for like the secret key. We've just found the key to everything tone wise. And if you get this, you're set for life. You have, you know, great tone, which isn't going to fucking happen, you know?
Well, and it's not, I mean, I'm the same way. I mean, like I said before, we're walking contradictions, you know, we're in it. So we're going to be hypocritical about certain things, but that's because we're human beings. But at least you and I and other people foundationally believe the science because it's been tested, and we believe in blind testing, and we believe what has been the results of those tests, right? So, but we're still silly, you know, human beings who are superstitious in some ways about certain things, and that's totally fine. And I guess that's the ultimate thing that I've come to, is accepting my own ridiculous hypocrisies and silliness and you know, superstitions. But definitely, I don't like it when people knowingly try to defraud others or screw them because they take advantage of those superstitions or those human preconceptions that we have about certain things.
No, it's interesting because the electrical engineers on the one end are responding to the people like the guitar players on the other end that says, like, you can't measure mojo. And the electronic engineers are going, that's why we have tools. We can measure everything. But in a way, they're right. You can't measure mojo because it's like a personal thing. You know what I mean? It's like, there's no way I can measure what you hear. You know what I mean? There's no way. It's ridiculous to even try. But the thing of it is if you're using ears for your own personal thing, or if you're a producer and engineer and you have good ears, it's super important to have that and trust them and all that stuff. But at the same time, from the electronic engineer's standpoint, it's like the reason we have the tools that we have now is because of those things that we're incapable of doing. Like the biases that everybody's going to have no matter how much they try. These instruments take that out of the picture. You know what I mean? And allow us to measure all this stuff. And it's pretty fascinating. I mean, we land spaceships on meteors or whatever the fuck we did. So yeah, I mean, it's like not that we don't. It's not like this mysterious thing. Well, we just hasn't caught up with that yet. Well, people don't really understand Bigfoot. You know what I mean? Just knowing this stuff and knowing about bias will just help you evaluate stuff in the future and make smarter purchases and start maybe shifting your tone focus away from stuff and maybe on different ways of playing. I don't know. It's just what I did, but I don't know.
Yeah, because for musicians too, there's so much more to the experience than just the audio experience, right? It's like, what does that guitar look like to you?
Yeah.
What does that guitar feel like to you? Those are things that exactly, like, you could have this guitar that sounds like shit, but you love it because it's just such a fucking cool guitar. But ultimately, you'll probably get rid of it because it sounds like shit. But if somebody tells you it sounds like shit, but you think it sounds good, you're going to keep the guitar. But that's another thing that fascinates me too about us as human beings is like, we're talking about the audio, we're talking about things that can be measured scientifically. And then there are these other variables that can't be and that aren't scientific, right? It's like my affection for certain kinds of guitars or wood or whatever it is. That's all, that whole mix of things, again, is what fascinates me about us as human beings. And
there's a really interesting story by the guy who worked for Fender and the amp guy. I think his name is Richie Fliegler, if I say that name right. But he was friends with Mick Ronson. And one day he was over at his house and they went down to his, if I remember the story correctly, they went down to his basement and he showed him his Marshall that he had, that the spiders, the spiders from Marshall. And Richie is like this total tech head into, all these vintage amps and all these specs and stuff. He goes, oh, that's the Marshall, the one that has the blah, blah, blah. That's not the desirable one. And Mick Ronson just looked at him. He said, that was on all those Bowie records. I think I did okay with that. I think that damn does okay. And just kind of put him in.
Exactly.
He just, like the perspective just came in focus. Oh, I guess he's fucking right.
So yeah,
it doesn't matter and it matters.
But I've always been so insecure that I, like people go, well, do you hear that? I'm like, I don't know. Do I hear that? Especially in the studio, right? Like when we're listening to a mix down or something like that and somebody raises something, it's like, do you hear that? I'm like, I think. And again, it's power suggestion, right? That person will say, do you hear that? And you'll go, oh yeah, I hear that. All of a sudden, because it's brought to your attention, right? And it could be bullshit. So
another thing that's really interesting with modern audio, and this isn't really directly related to what we're talking about, but we're so used to now, in the studio, of seeing the waveform that a lot of producer engineers are starting to don't look at the, they're turning the monitor off. Don't look at that. Just listen to it. Listen to the music and don't look at the waveform because that can lead you to different things. You'll see different peaks and things maybe, it might influence what you actually hear. So yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. Yeah. Not to mention the bias that comes from shelling out X amount. I just spent $150 to have this pedal modded. It sounds so much better.
Totally. Well, or I spent $10,000 on this Klon. Listen to that fucking thing. It's gold, right? I mean, totally.
It has to be. I mean, when you show it it fucking has to be. So yeah,
it better be.
But somebody that might be someone's thing.
Yes, exactly.
My goal was to have a $10,000 to have the actual thing, and I support that. Oh, yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. So
well, that was awesome. I had a good time. I feel fulfilled. Check us out on all the platforms that you consume podcasts on. We are proud members of the Ruinous Media Network. We're cohorts with a bunch of other great people and podcasts, and we're really fortunate to be a part of that community. And until next time, keep listening. We really appreciate you guys out there. Chris, what do you got?
Play some guitar.